My parent named me Alma. The storyline is becoming who we are. The first time Mira realized she was becoming someone she did not recognize was on an ordinary Tuesday morning. There was nothing dramatic about it. No chateira de glass, nos crea-me argumens, no sudem revelation bene a burning sky. There was only the hum of her alarm, the gray light filtering through half-drawn curtains, and the strange sensation that the life she was living felt slightly misaligned, like a shirt buttoned one notch off. She lay still, staring at the ceiling. I should be grateful, she whispered to the quiet room. She had a steady job, a tidy apartment, a calendar filled with meetings that confirmed her usefulness. Her parents called her successful. Her friends described her as dependable. On paper, she was a model of stability. And yet, beneath that polished surface, something restless stirred. It wasn't unhappiness. It was a question. Is this who I am? Or is this who I learned to be? That question did not leave her. Mira grew up in a house where silence meant safety. Her father valued discipline. Her mother valued harmony. Arguments were considered failures of character. Emotions were handled like fragile porcelain, displayed only when neat and controlled. People respect strength, her father often said. And kindness, her mother added. What neither of them noticed was that Mira internalized both lessons in a way that erased her. She learned to be strong by not asking for help. She learned to be kind by swallowing her anger. She became agreeable, achieving, responsible. When she cried as a child, she did it quietly. When she felt jealous, she turned it into admiration. When she wanted something unusual, a different hobby, a different path, she told herself it was unnecessary. Children are brilliant observers. They learn who they must be in order to remain loved. Mira learned that love was steady when she performed well and remained calm. So she shaped herself accordingly. By the time she entered university, she had a talent for becoming what others needed. Group projects thrived under her leadership. Professors praised her reliability. Friends confided in her. But no one asked what she wanted. Not because they didn't care, but because she had trained them not to. Adulthood offered new roles, and Mira filled them effortlessly. She became the diligent employee who never missed a deadline, the friend who remembered birthdays, the daughter who visited regularly and reassured her parents that everything was great. It was great. That was the problem. Her life was so carefully constructed that dissatisfaction felt irrational. She did not suffer any obvious hardship, yet she felt hollow in moments that should have felt full. One evening after work, she stood in the grocery aisle staring at rows of cereal. The decision between brands felt monumental, not because cereal mattered, but because she suddenly realized she did not know what she preferred. She always bought what was on sale. She always chose what seemed practical. What did she actually like? The question lingered longer than it should have. That night, she sat at her kitchen table and wrote in a notebook. Who am I when no one is watching? The page remained blank. Self-awareness rarely arrives gently. It creeps in through small fractures in routine. Mira began noticing how often she said, yes, when she meant I'm tired. How often she smiled when she wanted to disagree. How often she felt resentment toward people who had never asked her to sacrifice anything. The resentment frightened her. I'm not an angry person, she told herself. But anger, she realized, is not the opposite of kindness. It is often the signal of a boundary crossed. She had boundaries. She simply never enforced them. The first real confrontation happened at work. Her manager assigned her a project with an impossible deadline. Normally, she would nod and find a way to make it happen. This time, something in her paused. That timeline might compromise the quality, she heard herself say. Can we adjust it? The room went silent. Her manager blinked, surprised but not offended. We can review it, he replied calmly. That was it. No explosión. No panicement. Yet Myra's heart pounded as if she had committed a crime. On her walk home, she realized something unsettling. She had feared consequences that did not exist. The cage she lived in was partly imaginary. Becoming who we are often begins with noticing where we have limited ourselves more than the world has. As Mira grew more aware, she also grew more confused. If she was not the always accommodating version of herself, who was she? The world offered countless models of identity. Social media displayed confident entrepreneurs, serene travelers, outspoken activists. Everyone seemed certain. She felt behind. Her friend Lila seemed effortlessly authentic, posting bold opinions, switching careers twice without apology, traveling alone. "You're so brave," Mira told her once. Lila laughed. "I'm terrified half the time. I just decided I'd rather be scared than stuck." The sentence echoed. Mira realized she had equated stability with goodness. Change felt selfish. Risk felt irresponsible. Yet perhaps stagnation was its own quiet danger. Comparison, she learned, distorts growth. It makes authenticity look dramatic and transformation look glamorous. In reality, becoming who we are is often awkward and slow. It is less about reinvention and more about remembering. Remembering what we liked before we filtered it. Remembering what hurt before we minimized it. Remembering what mattered before we prioritized approval. Transformation rarely happens in isolation. As Mira experimented with honesty, her relationships shifted. Some adjusted easily. Others resisted. When she declined a weekend plan because she needed rest, one friend replied, "You've changed." The words were not accusatory, but they stung. Had she? When she declined a weekend plan because she needed rest, one friend replied, "You've changed." The words were not accusatory, but they stung. Had she? Or had she simply stopped pretending? Another time, during a family dinner, her father dismissed her interest in taking a creative writing class. "That won't help your career," he said. "It might help me," she replied softly. The conversation grew tense. She felt 12 years old again, small, uncertain. But she did not retract her statement. Later that night, guilt washed over her. Was asserting herself disrespectful? Was she betraying the values that raised her? Growth often feels like disloyalty at first. When we step outside inherited expectations, it can seem like we are rejecting those who shaped us. But becoming who we are does not require erasing where we came from. It requires integrating it consciously rather than unconsciously. Her parents' values were not enemies. Discipline and kindness were strengths. The problem was not the lessons. It was the rigidity with which she applied them. She could be disciplined without being self-denying. She could be kind without being self-erasing. One rainy afternoon, Mira skipped work and walked aimlessly through the city park. She sat on a damp bench and let the drizzle soak her hair. "Why is this so hard?" she whispered. The answer surfaced slowly. Because identity feels like safety. If she changed too much, who would she be? If she disappointed people, would they still love her? If she pursued something uncertain, would she fail? Failure had always been her quiet terror. Not because she feared poverty or embarrassment, but because she feared losing worth. Somewhere along the way, she had equated achievement with value. If she was not productive, she was not enough. If she was not helpful, she was not lovable. That belief had shaped every decision. Becoming who we are, she realized, requires dismantling the invisible contracts we signed in childhood. Agreements that say, "I will be this, so you will keep loving me." The truth is, most of those contracts are imaginary. The love we fear losing is often more resilient than we think. And the love that disappears when we assert ourselves may not have been as unconditional as we hoped. 7. Experimenting with authenticity. Mira did not quit her job or move across the world. Her transformation was quieter. She enrolled in the writing class despite her father's skepticism. The first evening, she felt exposed reading her work aloud. Her voice trembled. Yet when the instructor praised her imagery, something inside her sparked, an old joy she had buried. She began waking early to write before work. Not for money, not for praise, just because it felt real. She practiced saying, "I need time to think about that," instead of immediate agreement. She allowed herself to admit when she was hurt. She tried new hobbies without committing to mastery. These were small rebellions, small permissions. Each one chipped away at the persona she had worn so comfortably for years. The more she listened to herself, the clearer she became, not in certainty about the future, but in understanding her present feelings. Authenticity, she learned, is less about bold declarations and more about consistent alignment. It is noticing when your body tightens in resistance. It is honoring your curiosity even when it seems impractical. With awareness came grief. Mira began mourning the years she had spent ignoring her own voice. She wondered what might have happened if she had explored creativity earlier, if she had challenged expectations sooner. Regret is a tricky emotion. It can motivate growth, or it can paralyze. One night, overwhelmed, she wrote in her journal, "I wasted time." Then she paused. Had she? Every stage of her life had shaped her. Her discipline allowed her to build stability. Her empathy made her a good friend. Even her people-pleasing tendencies had taught her sensitivity to others. Perhaps the earlier version of herself was not a mistake. Perhaps she was necessary. Becoming who we are is not about condemning who we were. It is about integrating every version of ourselves with compassion. She wrote a second line. "I did the best I could with what I knew." The regret softened. Not everyone celebrated Mira's changes. At work, when she began setting clearer boundaries, some colleagues labeled her less flexible. A friend who relied heavily on her emotional support felt distant when she stopped answering late-night calls every time. Growth disrupts patterns. When one person shifts, the system around them must adjust. Some relationships deepen. Others fade. Mira experienced loneliness in this transition. She questioned herself repeatedly. Was she becoming selfish? She sought therapy, not because she was broken, but because she wanted guidance. In those sessions, she confronted uncomfortable truths. She had derived identity from being needed. Without constant requests, she felt unsure of her place. "Who are you if you're not solving someone else's problems?" the therapist asked gently. Mira did not know. The silence that followed was both terrifying and liberating. Months passed. Mira's external life looked similar. She still worked in the same office. She still lived in the same apartment. But internally, tectonic shifts had occurred. She no longer chased praise with the same urgency. She evaluated opportunities by asking, "Does this align with who I'm becoming?" rather than, "Will this impress others?" Success began to look different. It looked like leaving work on time without guilt. It looked like submitting a piece of writing despite fear of criticism. It looked like having a difficult conversation and surviving it. She realized that identity is not a destination, but an ongoing process. There is no final, fixed self waiting to be discovered. There is only continual refinement. We are shaped by experiences, but we also choose how to interpret them. We inherit values, but we decide which to keep. We are influenced by culture, family, trauma, and opportunity, but we are not permanently defined by any single factor. Becoming who we are is a dynamic negotiation between past and present. One evening, during a writing exercise, Mira was asked to describe a trait she disliked in others. She wrote, "Arrogance." Then the instructor asked them to consider where that trait might exist within themselves. Mira resisted. She did not see herself as arrogant. But as she reflected, she noticed moments when she silently judged others for being less organized or less thoughtful. She saw how her need to appear capable sometimes masked a subtle superiority. This realization humbled her. Authenticity is not about crafting a flattering self-image. It requires acknowledging our contradictions, the generosity and the pettiness, the courage and the fear. By accepting her imperfections, Mira felt less pressure to perform goodness. She could admit mistakes without spiraling into shame. Shame had once been her primary regulator. Now accountability replaced it. She could say, "I was wrong," without believing she was worthless. This shift was monumental. A year after that gray Tuesday morning, Mira faced a significant decision. Her company offered her a promotion. It came with higher pay, greater responsibility, and longer hours. A year earlier, she would have accepted immediately. Now she hesitated. The role aligned with her old definition of success. But it would leave little time for writing, for rest, for the emerging parts of herself she was nurturing. She made a list of pros and cons. She discussed it with friends and family. Opinions varied widely. Ultimately, she sat alone in her apartment, closed her eyes, and asked herself a simple question. Which choice feels expansive, and which feels constricting? The answer surprised her. She declined the promotion. Not because ambition was wrong, but because it was not aligned with who she was becoming. When she informed her manager, he nodded respectfully. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. The world did not collapse. Instead, she felt a quiet steadiness. Choosing in alignment with oneself is one of the most profound acts of self-trust. Over time, Mira stopped asking, "Who am I?" as if there were a single fixed answer. Instead, she began asking, "Who am I becoming?" The difference was subtle but powerful. "Who am I?" suggests permanence. It pressures us to define ourselves conclusively. "Who am I becoming?" acknowledges growth. It leaves room for evolution. She realized that identity is shaped by repeated actions. Every time she set a boundary, she became someone who respected herself. Every time she wrote despite fear, she became someone creative. Every time she apologized sincerely, she became someone accountable. We become who we are through practice, not through grand declarations, not through external validation, but through consistent choices. As Mira grew more authentic, something unexpected happened. Others around her began shifting too. Her friend who once said, "You've changed," later confided, "I wish I could say no more often." Her father, though still skeptical about writing, began asking questions about her class. Their conversations grew more nuanced. At work, a colleague admitted she admired Mira's clarity in communicating limits. Authenticity invites authenticity. When one person steps out of performance, it creates space for others to do the same. This ripple effect reinforced an important truth. Becoming who we are is not a selfish act. It strengthens relationships by removing pretense. Connections built on false personas are fragile. Connections built on honesty are resilient. There were still days when Mira felt lost. Growth did not eliminate doubt. It simply changed her relationship with it. Instead of interpreting confusion as failure, she began viewing it as evidence of expansion. Uncertainty meant she was exploring new territory. One evening, while walking home under a sky streaked with orange and violet, she felt a familiar flicker of anxiety about the future. What if her writing never amounted to anything? What if she regretted declining the promotion? What if she disappointed people again? She inhaled deeply. Becoming who we are does not guarantee comfort. It requires embracing risk. But it also cultivates resilience. The knowledge that even if circumstances shift, we can trust ourselves to adapt. The stability she once sought externally, she now cultivated internally. Years later, Mira would look back on that Tuesday morning not as a crisis, but as an awakening. Her life did not transform into something cinematic. She did not become famous or radically different. She remained thoughtful, disciplined, kind. But she was also assertive, creative, honest, imperfect. She understood that identity is layered. We are shaped by biology, culture, upbringing, and environment. But we also possess agency. We can question inherited beliefs. We can redefine success. We can integrate our shadows. Becoming who we are is less about discovering a hidden, perfect self, and more about peeling away the layers of fear that obscure our natural inclinations. It is about recognizing when we are acting from obligation rather than desire. It is about distinguishing between values we truly hold and values we adopted unconsciously. It is about forgiving our earlier selves for surviving the only way they knew how. If Mira were asked to summarize what she learned, she might say this: we are not static beings waiting to be uncovered. We are evolving narratives. Childhood gives us a draft. Adolescence edits it. Adulthood questions it. And at any point, we can revise. Becoming who we are requires courage. The courage to disappoint, to experiment, to fail, to feel. It demands self-awareness, compassion, and patience. It is not a linear path. We will revert to old habits. We will doubt ourselves. We will confuse comfort with authenticity and fear with intuition. But if we continue listening, gently, honestly, to the quiet voice within, we move closer to alignment. Mira still wakes some mornings uncertain. She still faces choices that challenge her. But she no longer feels misaligned in the same way. Her life is not perfect. It is hers. And that, she has learned, is enough. Becoming who we are is not a single moment of revelation. It is a lifelong conversation between who we were, who we are, and who we are brave enough to become.